Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Planman. I'm your host, Bruce Weinstein, and I have belief that each and every one of us deserves a plan in life. I'm all about proactivity, and I think that a financial plan, an estate plan, a tax plan, a weight loss plan, any kind of planning helps you maintain control of your life and direction. Today, I'm being joined by Margret DeBruyn. She's an emotional risk specialist. Check this out. She has a master's degree in psychology from Columbia University as a certified emotional intelligence coach. She's a certified mindset coach as well as a certified sex and intimacy coach. Fellas, pull up a chair and pay attention to this. She has had 20 years in the financial services industry as a wealth manager, a divorce and financial planning specialist. She's also a certified financial planner. She's currently a business owner, author, and speaker. In her coaching, she helps business owners and entrepreneurs level up their skill set and mindset using intentional vulnerability, which is going to be the theme of our talk today, to gain awareness, identify emotional risks that are holding people back, and to learn how to strategically manage their emotions. I think half the male audience just clicked off. Clients increase their confidence and self-worth so they can experience greater connection, success, and love in their lives. I want to start out, Margaret, welcome you to Ask the Planman. We all talk about having financial security, but now we're going to talk more about emotional insecurities. Let's start a little bit on what we want to talk about, limiting beliefs and how we can help people wire themselves differently.
Great. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. So I believe that everybody is deserving of feeling love, feeling belonging, feeling connection, but also having success. At the same time, I believe that in order to trust others, we need to trust ourselves. And in turn, we can only receive that love, that success that we want if we believe that we're worthy of it and to the level that we are willing to manage our doubts. So this is a really interesting jumping off point because I think that many people, especially men, and I'm going to kind of, you started by saying they're calling them out. I'm going to call them back in to some extent to say that I think that there is this concept in business, right, that you can only create plans, that you can only act strategically when you are coming from a place of logic, when you are not in your emotions. You can only win when you are thinking with your head and you are not in your emotions or feeling your emotions. And here's the thing, it is not about not having emotions, right? It's about managing your emotions. And I think that this is one of the big misconceptions that I've seen over the decades in the business world as well as in personal situations. It's this emotions have become almost weaponized, right? So for women, they hear you're too emotional. For men, it's you have no emotions. But I would, for me, I guess to say is, it doesn't matter whether it's too much, too little, you're still not managing your emotions. And that's really where the problem is that most people don't know how to manage their emotions. And
yeah, no.
Go ahead.
What I want to correlate, if we can in here, because it has to do with our personal lives, but then in the business sense, how is this trapping or blocking or holding back that entrepreneur, that business owner, people in general? Obviously, it's their day-to-day lives, but if it's such a Venus flytrap that's got people stuck, what do you see that being an inhibiting them as far as their business goes? What's holding them?
And that's the whole component. It's this whole concept that in business, I don't have emotion, but you do in every day. The reality is that you're not using it as an asset. You're looking at it as this bad thing, but the reality is it is what is generating your limiting your beliefs. The things that are keeping you from being able to make the right decisions, the things that's keeping you from being able to level up your business. Yes, there's a component of it where you may not have the skill set. But those beliefs that are stopping you, they're being generated and connected to those emotions, right? Those emotional experiences that we've had in the past. So, this is the thing that people don't realize is it's fear, right? Just like in investing. Think about it, right? Like what makes people buy and sell when left to their own devices? Fear and greed. right? Back in the good old days when you couldn't get on the internet and buy your own stocks, right? You had to go through a broker. That was one of the big assets of, to me, one of the pluses of a broker is that broker was that emotional temper, right? They were the voice of logic to come in and say, look, I get you're seeing this on the TV, but here's the thing. Let's talk about this. Let's break it down, because fear and greed are what drive most of the, investment decisions, right? And
so let's come back to the limiting beliefs. In essence, for those maybe not connecting the dots, is let's call it the head trash or the baggage that we come out of our childhood with, where as a young person, 3, 5, 7, 10, 12, 15, you're told, no, that won't work. You're somewhat kiboshed in that free thinking based upon your surroundings and the people that have raised you, whoever that might be. Their limiting beliefs become your limiting beliefs. So the Elon Musk out of the world and the Jeffrey Bezos came out of that glass ceiling, got past what most of us might have. They had visions, and they didn't let the naysayers talk them out of it. And so is that a good way to say the limiting belief is the naysayer part of your brain that is telling you can't do it, it won't work, don't bother trying, so you failed before you even began. You talked yourself out of it. And so we're trying to break that pattern or habit. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, the key is that for us to get to where we want to get to, we have to have the most open mindset that we can have, right? And, we have to be open to, I think this is, one I hear all of the time, and especially more so, I think, from men, is I can do it on my own. Right? Because there's this, you look at the book, The Mass of Masculinity, and, one of those is that you have to be this ultra independent. I have to know everything. I have to be able to do everything. And the reality is that when it comes to winning, collaboration, partnerships, those are critical. And the thing is if you're sitting here in this idea that you have to do it yourself, that's your basis. That's your first jumping off point of a limiting belief right there, is that limit. So in the next, component of it, it's not even just what beliefs come out of our childhood, because those definitely shape us, right? We're going to have those concepts of living small because somebody put that in our head. But also, I think that for people like myself who's at that 50 marker, right, we've been kicked around a little. We maybe have had business failures. You maybe have had things in business where you didn't get to climb like you wanted to. It may have been a divorce, right? It may have nothing to do with business, that all of a sudden puts in your head, you're not worthy, you're not good enough, or your fears. It's not about your fears. It's really about your doubts. And so your doubts start to, I think that I love that whole concept of your bitch voice, right? And people say like it rides shotgun. Well, sometimes I think it's just driving the vehicle. And an example of that is, I was working with someone the other day, and they were just like, my business can't get to this next level because there's no one that, is going to work remotely with me. And I was like, on the whole USA, there's not in one of the 50 states a person that's going to work remotely with you on this unique skill. And they were like, well, and I said, so how many people have you reached out to hear that? Well, exactly. And that's the point. We convince ourselves before we ever start, right? And
you've answered for others before you actually ask them.
Yeah. So I think that the thing is that I look at it, we sit down as business people, right? We create these strategic plans. We say we want to accomplish these goals. We want to be this. We want to hit these numbers every year, etc. But we don't take it to the next step to say, get into the details of how it is. And when it doesn't work, we don't say, why didn't it work? Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we making the calls? Why aren't we reaching out to these people? And we don't realize how, for the most part, it's that we don't have the worth. We have doubt. We don't trust ourselves, right? And so therefore we're not, it's just like we're not connecting probably in the home just as much as you are in business. I think that it's harder for men to understand that how you are showing up at work is very relative to how you're showing up at home. And it's this concept that only in your personal life do you need emotion to move forward. It's I need emotion because my partner is demanding or my kid's demanding it of me. But the reality is that your clients are too. Your clients want to see you be real so they can connect with you. And it's about building trust. And I think, like, go back to the years, in the past, there's how many books have there been in the sales industry or in brokerage, et cetera, about building relationships, right? You grow your business with relationships.
Right.
But if you don't think that connection and vulnerability is necessary, how do you connect?
Well, let me, before we keep going down that, because it's a good point, I want to go back to where I'm hearing and seeing some of the challenges that if I'm, my listener out there, an addict isn't ready to get help until they hit a point of bottom. And a lot of people don't want to face this. They don't see that they have these issues. They live in their own sense of denial. And that point is they're just not receptive to the message, right? Same as the addict, whatever that addict is. And so as much as you're out there doing this, there's therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, people spend years and years, I don't want to use the word, uneffing themselves of how they grew up and what baggage they come into. And so as I'm hearing this, and I'll be as transparent, I've spent decades in therapy. So I'm a case study, right? And I cry. My wife, calls me a baby because I'm crying in the middle of a movie or something, and she's a stone wall. So I'm all about the emotion. But that's one out of how many. And so as you're dealing with the male ego and you're dealing and putting this out there, what I'm hearing is I'm going to know a lot of the brethren out there are going to be like, well, it's not me. I don't have that problem. And that's the whole point, is they're not receptive. You and I can only have a good dialogue and open communication if we're both willing to do so. So if the person you're trying to get to receive this information isn't being receptive, obviously they're not going to be your client, but you can't help somebody who's not ready to help themselves. I say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're the teacher for those who want it, but the student's not necessarily ready to accept it, if that makes sense.
Oh, and I think there is a reality to that, but there is also in America a crisis of boys and men. I mean, there is tons of research being done. There's tons of books being written on it. And the reality is that every person between the ages of 40 and 60 is going to go through the bottom of the happiness curve, right? It's a U curve, and you're going to be in the bottom of it. So here's my thing. You can sit here and avoid. You can say, that's not me. But I can tell you right now, the statistics are there. Men aren't happy. Hate to break it to you guys. There's a lack of fulfillment. There's a lack of purpose. And, you can ignore it. You can numb it. But at the same time, men are committing suicide at 3.5 the rate times that of women in this age group. Men are having addictions at 2.5 times the rate of women in this age group. And in the age group, the 40 to 60, divorces are on the rise. They are above the 50% average, and 80% of them are being filed by women. So here's my hard reality check. And that is it's time to start creating awareness. And if you're okay, right? If you're okay with feeling frustrated, unfulfilled, alone, isolated, and you're like, that's great. You want to stay there. And trust me, I do. I talk to people who are like, yeah, this is it. I know, like they literally say, I know what I'm doing is wrong and not going to get me where I want to get, but this is what I'm going to do. I can't help that, right? Like that's a choice. But on the same token, I think that where women have spent years developing awareness and trying to, get that growth mindset. And that's the interesting thing, is that bottom of the U curve we're all going to hit between 40 and 60. Women, the vast majority, come out, if not go through the whole experience of that bottom of the U curve with a growth mindset or a heavy tone of it, where men tend to get more fixed.
You tossed out the word, but we didn't necessarily introduce the concept. So you referred to it as the happiness curve take a quick second, just kind of break that down a little bit, because you're referring to it, but this audience hasn't been introduced to that yet.
Right, great. So here's the thing. There's studies that have been done, and they've been done over decades, and they've been done not just by psychologists, they've actually been done by economists, that there is such a thing as a happiness U-curve. And essentially, they kind of run it from 20 to 70, 80 range. And what the studies have found is that in that 40 to 60 range, we're going to hit the bottom of the U, right? And so the question is, how low, how miserable, how hard do you want to hit that bottom? And part of it is in our 20s, we're idealistic. We think that everything is possible. And then over the next 20 years, essentially things happen where the world doesn't go the way we want, right? You have business failures, you don't get promotions you want, you have divorces, you might have health issues, like all of those things where you become kind of more disillusioned. And for many nowadays, they're coming into their parenting, and while they're still parenting, they're starting to have parenting their parents, right? So you get into this place where all of a sudden people are realizing, like, my life has less ahead of it than behind it, maybe. And what have I got? Like, what have I done? Or you have, for women, maybe, and it happens for men, you have the whole empty nest, but on a big level, right? So now it's like, what's my purpose? I've raised my kids. Well, what's my purpose? I climbed as high as I can in my business. Now what am I going to do? Or maybe you've retired. And now it's like, well, I got all these years to go. What do I do? What's my purpose? And so I think that there's a crisis of purpose, whether you are male or female, that occurs in this bottom. And it's really about, how do you build resilience going in, or when you're in it, how do you get your mind to go to a growth mindset so that you can come out of it faster, right? And the interesting thing that appears to be happening is that women tend to have a growth mindset and like, okay, like, I'm going to go do all of these things and I'm going to go find my purpose and I'm going to go looking. Whereas men tend to do more entrenching in this is life, another day, another dollar. And many of them are like, my chance to win is over. My chance to, it's more of that kind of a retreating living, actually, into a more small mindset.
Well, you make it sound like they feel like they're defeated.
What?
You make it sound like they're coming out defeated from that curve. Like their self-assessment is, I didn't get everything I had hoped for when I was in my 20s or 30s, and now all of a sudden I'm pushing 60. And to me, I'm interpreting what you're saying is they view themselves as defeated or failed. And so it weighs them that way, versus women look at it of, here's what's next. I made my nest is now empty. Now I have to go find new purpose. And they embrace that, versus the men are like, they're somewhat lost.
Well, and for me, like, I think it's more than just they're feeling defeated, right? Like, so what they've found is no matter how much men are making, no matter how successful they are in this U curve, the vast majority of men are at this, what's next? What's my purpose? Right?
Well,
so
I think it ties. I think part of it ties into Coach Bert's book on prey drive, right? Is if the animal always needs to hunt, if you understand his concept, and go check out the book Flip the Switch by our friend here, Coach Bert, he's been on the show, is for the animal, the instinct of the animal, it's about the hunt. It's not necessarily about the catch, meaning the kill. Right. And so the second the dog, the wild animal, catches that prey, it's off to the next one. And us as humans have a similar mechanism. If you're in sales and in business, you're out chasing that big deal and the excitement of the big deal. Then you get in the big deal and it's so anticlimactic at that point. And then, of course, every sales manager is like, well, that's great, Margaret. What are you going to do for me next month? And you're back on that. Well, and so your prey drive has to keep staying activated. So at its core, I'm tying that into what you're saying here, is that constant chase, being on that hamster wheel, at least from the male perspective, because that's all I can give you, it's never enough. You're just constantly, that prey drive is never being sated. And so now, after being in that workforce, doing it 35, 40 years, that the male populace is coming out in a sense of lack of fulfillment, because they never get to satiate I said the word a minute ago. Satiate that prey drive, and to Coach's point of it, it's constantly activated. So how do you how do you serve both masters, if you will? Because if at its core, this prey drive is such a innate animalistic habit or trait we have, and then you're kind of, I don't know. I'm just going on. So, you get my point? I think you get my point.
Here, really quick. Okay. So the thing is that it's not so much about the hamster wheel. And my goal would be to help people get off a hamster wheel.
Sure.
The thing yes, there is that chase. And like Tim Grover talks about in winning, right? Like winning is always coming for you, because as soon as you get that win, you get that heaven, that high. Guess what? The next morning, the bus, I love this analogy. He says that as soon as you finish riding the ticker parade for winning, the next bus is there waiting to take you back to hell to start over, right? And the thing that, I do love about, what winning talks about and what Tim Grover talks about in there in winning is that there is a very big difference from having a winning mindset and managing your emotions, managing your doubts, your fears, etc., and going back and redoing that climb and getting that prey drive. That is very different than someone who is on a hamster wheel. Because when you are on the hamster wheel, you are just grinding. But you are recklessly grinding is what I call it. And the thing is where people, whether men or women, because I can tell you when I, climbed the ladder and got to being a CEO, when I was like, okay, what's next? What's next, right? Okay, I got here, now what, right? And I saw that with many of the women that were my clients when I was with Merrill Lynch. Literally, they were at 40 and 50, retiring from these high-end jobs, and they were just like, okay, what's next? And it's no different, I think, for men. So I think my thing would be is, number one, let's stop doing the reckless grinding, right? So going back to your concept of having a plan is, let's do something with intention. Let's do it with a plan. Let's do it with a purpose. And where men and women in the bottom of the U curve are struggling is they don't have a purpose. So the reason why that prey drive can't be, ignited is not because they're so burned out. There is some of that. Men and women both have burnout. It's a huge challenge right now for women in their, in this, is that they have a lot of burnout. But the thing is it's not about that. It's more about they haven't shifted their purpose. They haven't found their passion. And so what's happening is there's nothing to get ignited, because if you're a hamster on the wheel and you're just chasing the same thing over and over again, but there's no passion to it, there's no purpose to it, you're going to want to stop. You're going to not be very excited by it, right? And so this is where you see with a lot of people, and I think that it's probably, women just have had more opportunity for it because they've had to create their own opportunity. But this is where I think you really see people start to say, in my second half of life, I'd like to go do this career, right? And, I find it really interesting as the more I spend in this 50 range, right? I look at a lot of the people around me and they're creating, they've done what they've had to do to pay the bills when they had kids or to get to this stage, right? Because most of us in the Gen X range, right? We were brought up that you get a job, you work, you create the success, and now we're all like, what? Because many of us didn't have the opportunity to put our passion in it, right? And so we're not doing things that feed our soul. We're doing things that feed our financial soul, right? That feed the financial desires. And the thing is that human beings need to have, because we have emotion, right? We're more than that. We need to have that soul fix. We need to feed this. And so I think the wake-up call that happens is that where the big difference is for men and women is that women at that point in this U curve is where all those years where they're told to put others first, to put themselves second, put their kids first, their husbands first, the job, everything, the people at work, their friends, and you take, the back seat, it's in this 40 to 60 that they're like, I'm done. That's their burnout. I'm done. I'm burnt out on putting others first, and I'm going to put me first. So what's my passion? What's my purpose? So for them, it's like this, oh my goodness, what do I want to go create? For men, it's a different experience. And for many of them, it's a different kind of burnout. But they don't see it as, I want to go do something for me. Because in essence, they haven't been raised, right? They haven't been raised to do things for other people. They've been raised about doing it for them, but it's about protecting other people, right? So they're burnt out on having to provide and protect. And so it's really, I think, for men about opening up your mind to a paradigm shift. Like, this is your time frame, right? This should be the transition from others to you. And it's about igniting the prey drive by finding your purpose. And as Coach would say, taking that purpose and turning it into a profit. But when it's your passion, when it's not work, I was explaining to one of my employees who's younger, he's 25, and I was explaining to him, he's like, I don't want to have to just work forever. And I'm just like, I don't work. I get up every day. I don't think of myself as working because I am doing what I love doing. I'm in my jam, right? Like, I call it my jam, and it took me 50 years to figure out I get to do my jam, right? But I fought it, and my parents made me fight it for what I wanted to do for decades. And so I did the job. Like, that's me in the financial services industry, right? It's like finding something that makes money, but yet allows me a little feeding of the soul by helping with planning and helping people build their futures. But I really always wanted to be a coach, a therapist, of that nature, but I wasn't allowed, right? And then I had my limiting belief, you can't survive that way. So
let me do this, because I'm looking at the clock, and I want to keep this. We're going to make this a two-parter. Okay. So let's give a couple of so what's. I'm going to wrap up this session. I'm going to hit stop recording, and then we're going to jump in and we'll record the second piece, and we'll do part two. This way it'll be kind of 2 30-minute segments for people. So they're sitting there in their cars or whatever, they can't listen to an hour of this. So it's good stuff. So let's kind of give a quick summary of what we talked about so far with a couple of bullet points and takeaways for today's listener. And then I'll wrap up the show real quick, and then we'll start part two, and then we'll launch part two, and we'll get into braving and some of the other pieces that we wanted to talk about. Okay. So folks, for those listening today, Margaret's been sharing with us, which is all about limiting beliefs and finding your purpose and the happiness curve that a lot of us suffer, this lack of fulfillment, lack of purpose. And the statistics don't lie of where people between 40 and 60 come out of this happiness curve. And so we're going to break this down with her in part two. We're going to talk about some steps you could take for corrective action. She's got an acronym on the word braving. We're going to get into that. So stay tuned for part two of Ask the Planman. I'm going to wrap up today. Thank you, Margaret, for joining us. Folks, if you need some advice, always get it right. Come Ask the Planman. Hit me up at asktheplanman.com and planman.tv. Please like, share, subscribe to our show, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks.